Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to another Mental Health Avengers episode. I am Anthony Sitko, co-host of Capes on the Couch, and it is wonderful to be back here with all of these amazing, fantastic mental health professionals. Thank you all so much for taking the time this evening. It has been quite some time since we've all been in the same virtual room together. It's wonderful to see all your faces. Wish there were more of us, but scheduling and illness and things of that nature. But at least we're able to get 6 of us together in a room. So I guess that counts for something. I'm joined first off by my co-host, Doc Issues from Capes on the Couch.
Hello, everybody. I will try and bring the energy, but I just saw half of my hospital. So, I have to ration it out a bit.
That's fair. You are a very, very busy man, and we do appreciate, you being able to at least spend this time with us. Then we've got our resident Canadian, Dr. Goku from Guardians MH. Doc, wonderful as always to chat with you.
Oh, thanks for having me again. It's been a very long time since we've kind of joined up for one of these. We've tried to schedule one for the past, year and a half?
Yeah, I think we've tried in earnest, at least for the past couple of months, that I was reaching out, and it was, we had the idea for a while. We've had the topic for a while, but in terms of actually getting everybody on the same schedule, it's been a challenge.
I mean, if we just gesture broadly, that should about cover the explanation for that.
Yeah, exactly. That's just gestures at world. This is fine. Everything's on fire. It's fine. And we are joined by the trio from Chicago, the folks from Popcorn Psychology. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us here this evening.
Thank you, guys.
It's Brittany, Hannah.
Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Brittany. You can distinguish Hannah and our voices apart. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Ben from Popcorn Psychology. Glad to be here. Glad to be back with you all. It's definitely an important part of the mission of all of our shows to be joining up and helping spread this message to, defeat all the stigma and let's get mental health out there in the world. So we're happy to be here with you guys all doing the same thing as us.
Yeah. Last episode we released was November of 2020. So obviously the world has changed quite a bit in that time span, and yet not changed. And yet a lot of the changes are not for the better, I would say. It's definitely a mixed bag in terms of emotions and feelings on how we're all going to handle everything moving forward, and whether there will be a world to discuss even in the next 20 years, or whether we're all just going to be, underwater or on fire. Yeah, it's rough. So
my current bet is that we become like Sarah Connor from Terminator 2 out on the playground. That's my current bet.
Oh, Jesus.
That's a lovely
That's
visual.
not gruesome at all.
Oh, man.
Yeah. We want to just go right for the jugular right off the bat.
Yeah.
Just bony fingers on a chain link fence. Just
Wow.
The shockwave. Yep. That's it's quite a visual. Probably
Powerful
one of the last
film.
good films James Cameron made.
Oh.
So we're not talking
You don't
about
like
Avatar
the
2 now?
Papyrus one?
No. Oh, you mean Fern Gully meets Dances with Wolves
Meets Pocahontas?
meets the Smurfs? No, not a fan.
You're not a fan of white guy shows up, adopts the culture, and then brings savior to people who could have done it all by themselves with their own culture?
Yeah,
Not
white
a
savior
fan of that?
complex. No, not a fan of it. Saw the trailer in the theater when I went to go see the Doctor Strange sequel, and I yelled at the end, "Nobody asked for this."
Studios and
Top Gun
money
2,
asked
which
for
I'm all
this.
about.
Oh yeah, Top Gun 2. No, I know exactly. Nobody asked for a Top Gun sequel yet, but I am here for it. Okay, I'm seeing that in
Apparently
IMAX.
had or has a 100% on Rotten Tomato.
What has 100%?
Top Gun 2.
Really?
A 100% on Rotten Tomato. That's an achievement all by
It still
itself.
hasn't come out yet. We're still 2 weeks away, at least as of recording this. So we'll see if that number drops a little bit by the time the rest of the public gets to see it. But just for visual impacts. Anyway, we have gone wildly off kilter with this, as is the norm. So the topic that we are going with today is something that we discussed in our group Twitter chat. And we were kind of spitballing for stuff. And don't remember exactly who it was that originally suggested it, but we kind of quickly coalesced around the idea of talking about a lot of the claims made by quote unquote mental health professionals or mental health influencers about the variety of neurodivergent topics that are, prevalent on social media, and claims by these people to sort of speak on behalf of certain communities or present their experience as comprehensive or, representative of those communities, and the real danger that can arise from non-professionals or vulnerable people taking that advice to heart, whether it's videos on TikTok or comments on Instagram or things of that nature, people looking to social media for guidance and insight into their own mental health issues rather than going to a professional who can speak to them directly about their specific needs and their specific diagnosis. So we kind of coalesced around the idea of Dr. Google or Dr. TikTok, I suppose. That seems to be a big source of a lot of this information/misinformation trends and things of that nature. We're going to kind of open this up a little bit because this is obviously a topic in which I'm sure each and every single one of you have had direct experience, as all of you are obviously the mental health professionals. So I'm going to let you all sort of run the discussion for a little bit, and then I will tell you from my perspective as the non-professional here who has a diagnosis, but also does see a lot of that information on social media, how I feel about some of the stuff that, I see. So I guess the first thing is, the first topic is danger of following these mental health influencers or mental health advocates. I guess maybe we should draw a distinction between mental professionals with the social media presence versus these quote unquote advocates. So I'll just kind of throw this open if anybody wants to jump on this, if any of you have any thoughts.
First off, like anything, if you are wanting to take someone's advice, like if you're watching someone on social media or anywhere and you are being influenced by what they're saying, like just make sure everybody out there, this little tidbit is just go to their name, figure out what their name is, and if there are letters next to their name. And when you see those letters, Google those letters and see if those letters are an actual like licensure or if they are like something you can get on an online certificate course or, letters that actually don't exist in the professional landscape. And so I think like number one, I think that would be my first piece of advice to throw out there in terms of distinguishing professionals from just people who have personal experience or personal interest in psychology or therapy, or people who have gone to therapy, and just being mindful of that part of it first and foremost.
Right. Always considering the perspective of the speaker and the way they're presenting the information. If someone is presenting their own experience as their own experience, that is one thing. But if a person is just listing, as TikTok loves to do, where they talk while they list little, numbers, lists,
hidden symptoms,
right, and things like that, where they're representing themselves as a person who understands versus like just someone who has an experience and talking about what happened for them, what therapy was like for them, that's fine. But when it's, oh, I'm a person and here are some facts, and I'm 19 years old and read a textbook once. That's a big difference from talking to a professional that understands how to do differential diagnosing and understands the nuances between some diagnoses and what's a personality trait and what's a diagnosis, because those are very, very important differences. I've never met somebody that broke up with somebody who wasn't a narcissist, but TikTok sure makes it seem like everybody who's ever had an ex, that was a narcissist. And it's not true. And it's damaging.
Because I think it started off with like the Dr. Google that came with WebMD. And I had these discussions with clients in the past where if you just list like 3 symptoms, like you have a bump on the toe and something else, you have toe cancer. And it kind of goes down that rabbit hole. And then there was the coming with YouTube, where there were these longer form videos, some of them really good, some of them kind of riddled with inaccuracies. But now with TikTok, because it's so readily available, and they are these 30 to 60 or 90-second clips that are highly engaging and that unfortunately sometimes prey on people that are extremely vulnerable in a vulnerable state or a vulnerable age range. A lot of people look at the production value of some of these videos and do believe that these people are professionals. The article that I shared, there was this discussion where, just like Twitter, we have like these blue check marks. There might want to be something with TikTok of someone applying for like a blue check mark or something to show that they are credentialed.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to any form of media that allows for really wide adoption by people to produce content and not just consume it, although consuming it, of course, is its own concern. But if you go back to when the internet was developed and people had websites, you didn't just put things up willy-nilly, because it took a lot of effort just to get those single blue links that would turn purple when you clicked on them with no other bells and whistles to go along with it. And so people kind of said like, oh, if they took the time to do this, then clearly there's got to be some sort of credentialing behind it or something that I can research later, because all the information wasn't there. It wasn't even considered to be comprehensive. Now, this is really scary. The production values of what we're doing right now, just talking to each other, is better than anything that was ever done 20 years ago. And all it took, at least for me, was to come home from work and turn on my computer and set things up, in a matter of minutes. And although I do have the license and the training to go along with what I'm saying, that part that allows for the access to the entire world to hear what I say is no different than a person with no resources, no education, no funds, no other motivation besides saying, I want to be heard. And so the incentives behind all of this, of going viral, of eventually getting monetized if you have a channel, of advertisements, all these things are way at the forefront of algorithms compared to any of the actual information that can be found. So that's really what scares me about all of this.
And professional titles for some people can be rather confusing. So I had a moment, I think it was yesterday, I was researching something and found a video on YouTube, and the person kind of looked at the person, didn't know who they were, looked at their about page and saying, oh, they're a psychologist. So me being a psychologist, oh, that means a lot. So I have no idea who they are. So I researched who they are. Well, come to find out, they are someone in Germany where they're calling themselves a psychologist, but psychologist in Germany is not a protected title.
There's a good term.
Ooh.
Protected
so for me,
title.
Because for me, psychologist in Canada is a protected title. The only person that can call themselves a psychologist is someone that has a degree and a license. But there, someone can call themselves a psychologist, and people wouldn't necessarily see the difference if they wouldn't look further or past that. And that just made me question.
As it should, because some states also allow for people to be referred to as psychologists without the same protections that other states have. Like for our title of professional counselor is a protected term, but you can't call yourself a counselor without having a license, without having a degree. Although there's some goofiness with who can use the term counselor, but the reality that anybody can be a therapist. Therapist is not a protected term, and they can call themselves a therapist or a coach. Oh, don't get me started on coaches.
Oh boy, here we go.
I mean, I think that's a trend that I see on social media across the board. Like I would say more specifically like YouTube and TikTok. I will say off the top, I love TikTok. I spend a lot of time on a daily basis, too much time perhaps on TikTok. So I hold it close to my heart. And I think like a lot of things that have blown up, including like YouTube now and mostly before, I think when people get enough cred or enough attention in a niche thing like psychology or mental health or, like dieting, which is a whole nother thing. I think when people blow up on that, as a trend I noticed is someone will be like, I don't know, like executive assistanting, and then they'll blow up on TikTok for their like hobby, like their niche interest of like doing life coaching on the side or like doing like health stuff on the side. And then once they blow up enough on social media, their full-time job will become a coach, quote unquote, for like the thing that they're getting kind of famous for. And so I think that's something I think to be wary of on these spaces is that I think what feels specific about, in my opinion, with like YouTube and TikTok is that there can be a great attachment to a person and to them as like an influencer. And so I think people will disregard the steps that go into or not even be aware of the steps that go into being a professional, quote unquote, around something because this person's like done their hours kind of on social media, proving themselves to their mass audience.
Yeah, and that becomes like a comment war.
Yeah. And then people get very protective of them.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that I want to be pro this about is that I do respect and acknowledge how the social media has helped people have a more universal experience, especially in places where they may be a bit more isolated for whatever reason. And so I think it allows more diverse voices and, more isolated voices to be heard. And so I think because of that, and because people will still feel very seen by things they experience on TikTok and other places, that they do get very protective of these people that have a great like influence on them. And so I think that's what's hard about it too, is then it becomes hard to have like open dialogue around the credibility or the safety kind of even of them having these stances because people won't really hear that. It becomes like this almost like idolatry space. And so you can't really have an open dialogue about, is this appropriate to do? And I think something I'm now starting to notice, because I'm fully on therapy TikTok in both directions, is that I have now seen like true therapists, like protected status people stitching these videos you guys are already like alluding to, which is like, if you like put a finger down, like ADHD edition, or if you display these certain traits while dating, you probably have an avoidant attachment style. Attachment styles are just going gangbusters on TikTok. And so I think we've kind of pendulum has shifted from this is great because people are getting seen. There's universality around this to now getting to this place where we're like over pathologizing, like, pretty like standard behaviors or just things that are like a product of situations happen to you. Like you mentioned, Ben, like a breakup. We're all not the quote unquote best or more regulated versions of ourselves when we're going through a breakup or things like that. Or when we're dating even, because dating is hard. And so I think what people
or who we were in college or high school and we're dysregulated by hormones. Like I'm not proud of who I used to be, but that is not reflective of who I am, and that's true for all of us.
And so being wary of over pathologizing those traits and behaviors and giving people basically like making people self-conscious of things that they don't need to be self-conscious of. So it's like swung the other way of othering things when it was, at the beginning, more of like feeling seen.
And then
sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. And then to like your point and, Dr. Goku's here is that once it becomes a comment war, the danger of that is because of the power of these algorithms is then it drives engagement and spreads it to other people's feeds, which lends legitimacy to it that might not be warranted just because it has production value and is getting attention, which we have seen with the mass media stupidity in the United States lately in particular. I'm sure it's other places, but I live here so I can speak to here, is that people are confusing high production value, strong opinions, well worded, well spoken as truth.
Well, not for nothing.
Fact.
That comes long before the internet. That's been one of the major issues of media and communication writ large for decades, if not centuries. I mean, I was a communications major in college, and I did extensive studies on the history of mass media. And I mean, you can go back to someone like Marshall McLuhan, who was writing in the 60s and the 70s that, you know, the medium is the message.
Yeah.
That the way it's written and the way it's presented is itself the message. And my one professor would always say the medium is the massage, in the sense that depending on what medium you use, you can tweak or shift the message itself. So thank you. Shout out to Dr. Pam.
Right. So I think there's also an inherent barrier for mental health professionals, and I'll expand it to healthcare professionals in general. And I'm going to go from, of course, a medical doctor's view, because that's my training. Although we didn't have it as direct as I know the medical school classes that I see now do, we had a certain small allotment of our time indicating not just how we document in our charts, but when we do engagements, when we do speak to the public or speak to families or whatever it is, how we're supposed to protect ourselves. Like, you have to be careful. Don't make sweeping generalizations. Don't go so broad that you're going to disseminate information that can be misused. And so it was something that we weren't told, you know, by the way, get your message out to as many people as possible, and who cares what happens after that. We were supposed to be grooming people for only what they needed to know on a need to know basis, and keep it as focused as you can with whatever topic, similar to if you were teaching a class and you had to treat it with that level of respect. And now, thankfully, there are some people that are doctors or other professionals that are influencers as well. And I can tell you, at least when I do some of the searches in background, it can be a potentially great thing, and I support them. And it can be, I'll go ahead and give the name, TikTok Doc. The guy, this wasn't mental health related specifically. I even forgot what his specialty was, but he ended up, you know, becoming really viral because he would dance a lot on TikTok in between his cases. I think it was a surgical subspecialty. I may be wrong about that. But the point was, he got popular, and then he ended up with some sort of harassment case and is pretty much shunned for the rest of his career. So the fact that sometimes we look at just the short-term gains of the information that we're putting out there and not looking at the long-term consequences, I think is another thing. When you start labeling yourself as a guru, you know, I'm going to quote William Bernstein, who was a neurologist who turned to financial planner. And he said, the reason why people use the word guru is because charlatan is too hard to spell. So
that's not
Hammer's
wrong.
pretty easy, though.
I was going to say that the guy you were describing kind of sounds like the milkshake duck phenomenon. Also, Doc, I was going to say, maybe given the current climate, grooming is not exactly the word that one would want to be using.
Hey. Oh no, I knew what I was doing. See, once again, you're picking up on certain points.
Well, that's fair.
I was going to say, just jumping off of what you were saying, I think also people don't know that, like, ethically, if you are a trained professional, like you're talking about, ethically, you don't talk about quote unquote real people. Like, there's a reason why on our show, and I don't know if it's the same for like you guys on Capes on the Couches, we made a decision to not talk about real people that have lived in real life. And that's why, I don't know if anyone's ever noticed who listens to Popcorn Psychology, we don't do like movies based on real people. I think the closest we got was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because that is a fictional character technically, but obviously very based on a real person who did die by suicide. And we made a point of saying in like that episode, like, we are not talking about Hunter S. Thompson that as a person, we're talking about this character that he wrote. And so it's because ethically it is inappropriate for us to diagnose and discuss real life people who we are not actively seeing as therapists. And if we were seeing them as therapists, that would also be inappropriate because that's confidentiality. And so I think also when I see people on TikTok who are diagnosing Kim Kardashian or like people on reality TV shows, like that is inappropriate. And that could get you into trouble ethically or just like not great for your reputation. Like I don't know how I got on this quote, like onto this chain, but like I watched this quote unquote therapist. I don't know her credentials, so I can't speak to that, who was talking about how this other YouTuber is a sociopath. And I was like, this is wildly inappropriate. And you are, and I remember thinking when I watched this, wanting to scream at this girl, you are at risk. And this is a huge platform that she was guesting on. I was like, you are potentially ruining your reputation right now for what, a bunch of clicks and the respect of Shane Dawson. Like, it's like that part of it is, it's like you were talking about the fame and the seduction of that gets in the way of ethics. And I would even talk about that Dr. Oz. Like that's more of the medical base, but he has had to sit in front of Congress and back up like these claims he makes on his shows about miracle cures and shit like that as a medical doctor. And so it is like that.
Now he wants to be a senator.
I know.
Clout rules everything around me.
And he's endorsed by Trump. And it's just like, and
I don't think that's
follow me, y'all.
And so I think that's part of it too, is being mindful of, it's just sad to see people or professionals risk everything, in my opinion, for fame in some capacity, especially something like TikTok, where you can definitely make a living on TikTok and YouTube, but like that's rare probability wise. And so that's, I think, is also an indicator of a turnoff, guys. If you guys are also like cluing in on TikTok people, YouTube people who are making splashy statements and talking about real people, like they probably aren't a therapist you'd want to see.
Well, what's going on as well is to be licensed means that a regulatory body has issued you a license, meaning you need to abide by that code of conduct and the code of ethics. And if someone doesn't really like what you said or something happened in therapy, they can make a formal complaint to that regulatory body that gets then studied, and then you go through a panel. There's a whole bunch of things that's going on. Coaches, life coaches, or people that call themselves therapists that are not under regulatory bodies, they can say whatever they want, and there's no recourse for the general public to say, well, this is false information.
And the age of responsibility is over.
Yeah.
Except for those of us that are regulated.
Yep.
Because mental health professionals, we have been kind of hammered into our minds that everything that you can say can then can be used against you in some way. So we've been overly cautious in presenting information to the public because of the regulatory body, where it's kind of given place for these advocates and influencers. Some of them are really good, but some of them have very nefarious intents. It's kind of created this culture war between these advocates versus the professionals, whereas a lot of people say, well, the professionals are kind of keeping things at arm's length from the people that are keeping it locked behind a paywall or something.
The things that psychiatrists don't want you to know.
Where people say, oh, mental health is health. It should be freely available. Therapy should be free. And agree, yeah, there should be more access to therapy, but people also need to make a living. And I know for a lot of us, we try to provide as much free information as we can to people, but that's not a substitute for actual therapy.
No, I mean, like, it's so important to understand that we as professionals are ethically bound to not provide a diagnosis to someone we have not personally assessed. And that is a critical difference. And it's what like stresses me out when I see people like going on, whether it's YouTube Shorts or Facebook Live or TikTok or anything, and offering diagnoses of real people, even when there was the, 150 professionals or whatever that all signed off that Donald Trump had narcissistic personality disorder. And I was just like looking at it going like,
yeah,
you guys, Like, I mean, I, have my opinions about that and, shared the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder with absolutely no context on my Facebook page. Went, yeah, you guys can read this and, decide what you want about it. But here's the information without any context whatsoever. Like seeing that happen, like made me groan because like, even if that's true, just ruined the legitimacy of our entire profession by diagnosing someone you have not personally assessed by a persona they present in the media and select sound bites. And that is irresponsible. Like, true or not, it's irresponsible to provide a diagnosis to people you haven't seen because then it cheapens the meaning of having a diagnosis or what diagnoses are even for.
Because anyone can pick up a copy of the DSM. If you have a couple $100, you can get
right, $200.
Yeah, oh, man, they're expensive. Now the new one just came out. I was like,
good old TR. Yeah,
I just bought it and I was like, $200, really? Again?
Yep.
Yeah, but anyone can buy a copy of it, and read through the diagnostic criteria, but they don't necessarily have the nuance of it because you can see the same diagnostic criteria between multiple diagnostics.
Yep.
But then which one do you attribute it to and how severe is it? Because one of the big things is, does it create like a significant impairment in the person's life?
Ooh, I love that one. That's a big, important.
And, I was talking to some clients about like OCD and talking about psychobabble. And a lot of people saying, oh, I'm so OCD because I do these things. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's OCD. It means you have a behavior. I was talking on one of their podcasts the other night where I have this little quirk where if you have like two light switches that kind of control lights on like two separate floors, I hate having the light off and them being like lopsided. I'll go up the stairs, turn one down and go back down. And then it makes me feel good. Is that OCD? No, by no means. It doesn't create any significant distress for me. And I can go about my day if I don't do it. But looking at the criteria, people say, well, yeah, that's a form of OCD behavior.
I would say that's maybe a compulsion, perhaps. And I'm speaking obviously clearly as the non-professional here. I would say maybe that's a compulsion, but I wouldn't say it's obsessive. And certainly to the extent that it, within the parameters of the OCD, it is definitely not something that has a detriment to your life. I think we've spoken previously. I know we've had the discussion, at least on my show and perhaps amongst the Avengers, about folks who say, oh, I'm so OCD, et cetera, because, I like things neat and in a particular order. I have family members that are like that, people in my life that say, oh, that's part of my OCD. And I'm like, you don't have OCD. Don't conflate that.
You just brought up something that I think is really important to this and goes back to the whole idea of, the dangers of saying one person doing this. And I know I already used the term guru, but when you use a term and it comes from someone that has enough clout that people listen to them, then all nuance is gone. That's a huge point to all of this. It doesn't matter the second part of what you just said, which was a great example. Just use the actual words of what you're doing rather than putting this other label that really is not meant to be just flung around by every person in the world. So if you really enjoy having things organized, just say that. There's nothing wrong with having the face value of what you're saying first before pathologizing it. And that is something that I think happens when you shorten the medium. I love podcasts because at least people get to expound more. And I have an inherent bias, of course. But things like TikTok and Twitter just mean that you get the bare minimum of whatever the topic is, and you have to make it as forceful as possible. So what are you going to say? Are you going to say, this is a quirk that I've noticed about myself? Or are you going to say, this is my dysthymia? I can't believe I started seeing that word thrown around. I'm like, okay, really? We're going there? We're just going to go ahead and classify everything about your moods that are supposed to be for prolonged periods of time. And because you said, this is my dysthymia when I'm washing the dishes and you have a sad face on it. Okay. I really don't appreciate sometimes how things just get ground down to the idea that you can do this all so haphazard.
Yeah, I think for me, what occurs to me as you're talking, Doc, is I'm literally in my head going, TikTok made everybody the Jeff Foxworthy of mental health.
The great current reference.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone that's listening will get that. I think the thing that is, I think everybody's making really good points. And and at the same time, in this country, we don't have any mental health education. So part of the problem is that people are seeking education however they can find it. And as we have always known, since the internet has been created in general, there's always going to be shit that is not good for everybody. And I think that TikTok is just the latest thing. And at the same time, I'm still having meaningful conversations with my clients when they send me a TikTok that they want to talk about in session, and make sure that I clarify some things for them. So I do think it's tricky. It's tricky because I think it makes it very clear that people want more information and that people want to be able to understand. And unfortunately, like everything else that we have that is helpful in any way, people f it up.
Well, I think you make a great point, Hannah, which is that these tidbits of information should be treated like tidbits, and they should lead to a bigger conversation, either with their therapist or doing research and like maybe talking to their doctor, that kind of thing. Like it should be a starting off point for something or supplemental to something more meaningful, or with a professional who can clarify these things. Because like I've even gotten, like I recently learned about ARFID through TikTok, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And it ended up coming up in a session I had. And to be quite honest, I will out myself on this. If I hadn't seen that TikTok about ARFID like a month before, I wouldn't have thought to bring this up with my client. I wouldn't have even been aware of it. And I think I have the ability to filter that information through my trained brain. And so you're right, Hannah, in that I think I've seen certain TikToks make me more introspective about my mental health, but I take that into context and I do more with that information than just take it at face value. And I don't think it's wrong to get inspired by something you see on TikTok and then go with that. Because you're right, like it is a means of information. And I think that you're right. Like, I think it's a great point of like mental health is just not, we're still in the dark ages in terms of overall awareness of mental health. And I think because of that, we do see people latch on to terms and not quite use them correctly, which is a big part of what we talk about on our podcast. I'm sure you guys is as well, of like providing more clarification. I think the one I see most often now is, oh, she's borderline, they're acting borderline. Like to the point that, I mean, we have a TikTok, Popcorn Psychology, that I run. And I had to make a little PSA after like our Regina George Mean Girls episode, like TikTok, because people were just, we didn't even mention, I don't think we even mentioned borderline in the TikTok itself. And people were just going back and forth about borderline personality disorder in the comments and being really like vilifying it a lot. And then people were coming in like getting like who had probably borderline or loved someone with borderline personality disorder and were getting really upset. And I had to make a PSA of like, we have to be mindful that real people have these diagnoses. And it's not just like a fun term to throw around or a way to feel smart because you know something savvy or about mental health. Like there are real people that have these diagnoses who are full human beings. And so we always have to be mindful of that, because I think the irony is, and where I kind of feel for this, is that I think people are learning more about mental health because they're trying to decrease the stigma. And then ironically, sometimes weaponizing that information, and that increases the stigma. And so like I had to make a point on our TikTok of like the mission statement of our podcast is to decrease stigma on top of the improving on awareness. And so we have to be mindful of the way we're using this information and repeating it. And like the groups that we're in, it's like that thing where you should always assume that there's someone in the group you're talking like that has experienced the thing you're talking about. And if you think that way and that makes you pause, that should be all the information you need to know. And I think that's also the other part of this is just like the wall you can hide behind on the internet of like, you can say things on the internet you wouldn't say to somebody's face. And so also I think that encourages sometimes this behavior of like, I'll talk mad shit about borderline personality because I might even have a PFP, like a profile picture where people can, you know, even see what I look like. much less like confront me in a way that feels truly challenging.
I think one thing that happens as well is people and the general public's perception or maybe lack of understanding about the mental health field and professions. Whereas there are so many different types of mental health professionals that a lot of people get confused. I've had to clarify this to many people quite a number of times in terms of what's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and the difference between a psychologist and a counselor. But people don't really have that understanding. But there's also this perception of, well, psychology is not a real science. So it's still, it's common sense, or there's no real backing. So they feel that they can talk about it because it's not as rigid or structured as, say, like a blood test or looking at certain enzymes for a certain diagnosis. And in the article that I had shared, I would really encourage a lot of people to read the article. It's called On TikTok Mental Health Creators and Are Confused for Therapists. This is an article on Mashable. And there was a quote by one of the counselors there mentioning that you wouldn't ask an astrophysicist to really sit down with a flat earther, or you wouldn't ask a physician to sit down with a naturopath. But people are asking mental health professionals to sit down with these creators and these advocates to kind of hash it out, to kind of see both of them as legitimate as one another. And again, there are quite a number of mental health advocates that I really admire, that they're doing great work. But a lot of what they're talking about is funded in research. They take the time, they ask mental health professionals, I want to talk about this. What's your opinion? They have mental health professionals there to discuss certain points. So they understand their limitations. And just because we are licensed doesn't mean we know everything. By all means, I know how little I do know. And I'm not afraid to say it in session. A client will tell me something. It's like, you know what? I have no idea, but I'll research it and I'll get back to you.
Well, that's a wonderful point. I'm certainly glad you do that, Doc. One of the things that I wanted to say in reference to what Brittany had been saying prior is, talking about these things that are jumping off point. Treat it like you would Wikipedia. Wikipedia is and should be the entry point to look further into those firsthand sources that you look to. Okay, I'm looking to read Wikipedia to get an overall sense. And then if I want to know more, I'm going to look at the things that are hopefully cited in Wikipedia and do that research further. I'm not going to read a Wikipedia article and all of a sudden call myself an expert on quantum computing. It's, this is something that interests me. And because I am a hyper generalist in my method of thinking, credited in large part to my ADHD, which is something I'm sure that we'll get to, later on in terms of when I sort of discuss my experience with social media and neurodivergence and things of that nature. I like to know a little bit about everything. It's very difficult for me to do a deep dive into any one particular topic, but I will read articles and just go on a wiki walk all over the place and have, 17 tabs open because I've started this. And, okay, I'm going to read about that in a second. Right click, open a new tab. All right, let me finish this one first. And then I go to the next one. Right click in new tab. And then by the time I'm done, it's, 3 hours later and I've read, 72 different articles about any myriad of topics. But it should be noted that, again, I would not consider myself an expert or able to talk at length about any of the things that I just read because it's a cursory view. I am not a professional. I'm certainly not going, as I said, call myself an expert or qualified to give a TED talk on any of the stuff that I just read. All I can talk about is what I've learned and personally studied. And At this point, I wouldn't even feel qualified to give a TED talk on legal matters, but that's a story for another time. So to your point, Brittany, I think that's what a lot of folks are doing is, unfortunately, it's human nature. We want the path of least resistance. A lot of folks will read the Wikipedia article and say, yeah, okay, I know all about that, because they read the Wikipedia article. They didn't read any of the first party citations. They didn't read anything else on that. They just read the cliff notes in essence and go, yeah, okay, I got it. And then turn around and speak about it. And because of the anonymity on the internet and, what Penny Arcade likes to refer to as, pardon my language, the greater internet f***wad theory, that normal person plus internet plus anonymity equals f***wad, that you get folks that are able to, or that think that they can speak without recourse or any sort of repercussions, because why not? What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get mad at me? Okay. Everybody, this is a bold statement, but every single one of us has a little bit of a troll inside us that sometimes just wants to poke the bear just to see what happens. That's just human nature. I think it goes for any and all of us, that sometimes you just want to just throw the bomb and run away. And so that the internet gives us all that release and that catharsis with no repercussions. You wouldn't say, you wouldn't say 90% of the shit you say online to someone to their face, but yet we feel, because we're sitting behind a keyboard, oh yeah, sure, I just called this person X, Y, and Z name, and there's nothing to it. So to that point, I think that's also a large part of it, is because we get in these discussions, and because people feel so personally connected to these issues that their diagnosis becomes their identity, or they latch onto this, that, oh, I have this, or I've self-diagnosed, or whatever the case may be, that it is a part of who I am, that therefore I must defend and speak on behalf of all of those similarly situated with fervor and passion. And I'm not going to tell anybody not to care about things, or not to take comments about something that you care about without thought or without response, but be mindful of that statement that you're making. Be mindful of what it is that you're talking about, and what are you hoping to accomplish? Are you talking just to hear yourself speak, or are you talking because you're trying to engage in a legitimate conversation? I think that's something that is frankly ignored a lot in modern discourse.
But what you're mentioning there is, when someone either gets really diagnosed or officially diagnosed, or kind of have self-diagnosed themselves, they can kind of take it upon themselves to have that identity, but also it makes them an expert on their pathology, not everyone else with that pathology. And I think that's the nuance that a lot of people may miss. Someone's ADHD may not be everyone else's ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I'm playing devil's advocate, but where I always like to put a grain of salt with that is, when I experience as a clinician, is that sometimes people find so much relief from getting a diagnosis and things making sense and finding something that feels like the answer, that they can't help but like spread that around, or try to give that feeling to other people. And so I think that's also part of it too, is I think sometimes by the time people get to therapy or figure out what might be going on with them, they feel so, I mean, it's like when people find religion sometimes and they're like, this made me feel so good. Like I want to throw it in everybody's face. And so I think that can be part of it. And what you're talking about as well is that there is a lot of nuance. And I think that's what gets missed too. Like when people, because I think in America, which is all I can speak to, we see a lot of things still through the medical model of like, these symptoms A equals this diagnosis B, which equals this treatment C, which equals this prognosis B for 6 to 8 weeks, and then you'll be healed or good or whatever. And so I think we still apply that a lot to mental health. And I have to explain that a lot in sessions I have with clients. And so I think also, because we think through the medical model, there can be a lot of what you're talking about, which is like one size fits all of, so this is what I did and this worked for me. And so this must work for everybody who has ADHD or everybody who has like severe dysregulation, and not really understanding that there's so much nuance in psychology. And there's so much like, I always make the joke with my clients that I teach you a bunch of stuff because it's like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. I'll teach you a dozen coping skills and you'll like 3. And those will be the 3 that you use over and over and over again. And so it's just not applying a more holistic mindset or a more like mental health mindset to mental health issues and diagnoses. Instead, putting that medical model that I don't think we're very cognizant that we do onto mental health. That's why, like, also I think people think that they can like self-diagnose too. And that's the WebMD kind of mindset. It's also why my mom, I love her, but my mom said, why do you need to go to therapy? You're a therapist. Don't you know what to do? And I'm like, it's not like I'm a doctor and I can like know what's going on and give myself an antibiotic. Like there's much more nuance to that. But I think that does get missed.
Yeah, but okay, I'll jump in on that. I mean, physician heal thyself. Doctors really shouldn't be treating themselves in any capacity. Yeah. I've stood by that for the longest time professionally, and the colleagues that I respect agree with that. With regards to the medical model, I totally understand that point, and it's true because, well, that's exactly how I was trained. But even now, I definitely respect that there is no way that I'm going to be able to fit all of these various shaped pegs into this one square hole or whatever. I get it. And I don't even try. The thing that I think is happening, though, when someone, I'm talking about self-diagnose, when someone self-diagnoses, often it seems to put off the work. In other words, the person has come to me saying, I have an answer and I'm just looking for you as the conduit to just follow through with what I've already done. And unfortunately, I can't take that shortcut. I still have to get to know you. I still need to know everything about your situation that's pertinent to your circumstance. I still need to know what the social factors are. I want to know what the biological factors are. I want to know the family dynamics. I want to know all of that stuff before I just go ahead and rubber stamp what it is that you're telling me. And also, heaven forbid, I may not agree with the conclusion that you've come to because I have a different perspective based on seeing many different people with many different presentations. And so I can apply that in a much broader range than that one person has applied to themselves. And sometimes that creates a barrier that I have difficulty breaking through because either this person is viewing me as someone that is antagonizing them, which clearly is never my goal, or someone that is actively sabotaging them because they are saying, I already did this. Why are you trying to undo what I've done? And that circumstance when it comes up, especially heaven forbid, I actually talk about medication with the person about something that I think is very relevant to what they're saying or the severity of what they're saying, then it creates a dynamic where I can't establish rapport at all. And so I love when people are motivated to find out more about themselves. That is amazing. That is wonderful. I love the opportunities that social media can present in terms of, being exposed to different ideas that they may not have thought of ahead of meeting someone like me. That is absolutely fantastic. I have X diagnosis. Do something about it. That's the step that's a little too far for me.
Since I'm a trauma specialist now and have worked really hard to be that. And when I see sometimes like the power in people telling their trauma stories through TikTok and the therapies that they have found. There is one somebody sent me on EMDR where a guy, he breaks it down in 30 seconds talking about like the power of having this shameful memory of being picked on as a kid at a talent show and giving the middle finger to the crowd. And that was a moment that he beat himself up over because he got shamed by his parents and then shamed by the school and carried that as I am shameful for years until EMDR helped him unlock that. And he said, I look at that kid now and I'm proud of that kid for standing up in front of that crowd and sticking that middle finger up and taking that shot and saying, fuck you, don't pick on me. And that changed my perspective on life, and having people find that and understand, wow, there's something that can make me feel like that is awesome. But when people say, I kind of like even though my lovely hosts want to shame me for being an old man and talking about Jeff Foxworthy, that's okay. I love you both anyway. But like basically people going, if you're sad and have a hard time sometimes, you might have dysthymic disorder. Like that's not a thing. Like if you're sad sometimes, you're a human being who is sad sometimes. It doesn't mean you have a diagnosis. You might, but bringing that into a meeting with a professional, the preconceived notion, unwilling to listen to anything a professional who can understand the nuance of the diagnosis process and help you understand, no, it's not actually that. It might be X, Y, or Z other things, but let's work on that. And rejecting that professional help and training just because you came into the preconceived notion based on a video you saw for 50 seconds that explained your whole life. That's like, I think where I also have a problem, Doc, is like the same. Like,
yeah, you were saying it's kind of the difference between feeling depressed and suffering from depression.
right.
And one thing I work a lot with clients and that I kind of often mention is the iceberg example. Most clients that will come into my office will come in with that tip of the iceberg, that explosion or event of this is what's going on. Yeah, we'll deal with that. But oftentimes the core of the issues are not the tip of the iceberg. It's everything that's underneath. And I think that is one thing that TikTok might be lacking, is that critical insight that you can only really gain within therapy of the entirety of the iceberg, not just what is above the water.
Very well said. Very well said. So I'm going to jump in here a little bit and talk about, as I said, from my perspective and some of the things that I've noticed, as the non-professional and as someone who has commented on and not necessarily sought out, but definitely identified with some things. And I've spoken about this on our show as well. I was in therapy for several months, and I had a good therapist. I won't go quite so far as to say a great therapist, because there was still just some barrier. It was good, and I definitely needed it, but I felt like there was something missing. And so early on, it was after maybe 2 or 3 sessions, she had said, I'm diagnosing you with generalized anxiety disorder because I feel that that's a large part of your presentation. And so I said, well, one of the other things that I've been, I guess, mulling over, to everybody's point in terms of self-diagnosis, is I said ADHD is something that I feel I kind of present with, and looking back on my life over the past, at this point, almost 40 years, I feel that there's a lot there to unpack. And she's like, you're close, but I don't know that I would say you're all the way there. And I don't recall the reasons, but I think from my perspective, one of the reasons why we didn't get into the ADHD as much is because when I went to her, the primary thing that I was dealing with was anxiety. And so the presentation that I was giving to her was, I've got all this stuff going on that's weighing on me. This is kind of what I need to address. And I think it was Doc, one of the shows a couple episodes ago, we were saying that, you only get a handful of sessions because of the current insurance system and everything in America. So you have to ration out, what do I present to my therapist as the foremost thing that I want to address? And so at that time, I was presenting largely a lot of the stuff. The crux of my conversation with her was about the anxiety that I was undergoing. But she's like, you're close with the ADHD, but she goes, I don't know that I would necessarily give you the full blown diagnosis. She goes, although I certainly understand where you could see that. But the more I talked about it with other people, and yes, in speaking with Doc and in speaking with, other professionals, and then going to an actual medical doctor and explaining the situations and stuff, I was like, I believe that I do present ADHD because of the way in which my brain works on a consistent basis. And so I've been on Adderall now for a couple of months, and I have found it has been wondrous. And again, I'm going to put this out there as not that it necessarily needs to be stated, but this is my personal stuff. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I just want to make that perfectly clear. I've been on Adderall, and it has done wonders. I was on the XR, but it was messing up my sleep a little too much. So I switched over to non-extended release, but it's done wonders for my life. And it's a situation where, frankly, I think this show, doing Capes on the Couch has opened up my mind and exposed me to a lot of conversations that I wouldn't have otherwise normally had. And then I don't specifically seek out these things online, but I see a lot of comments on Instagram. Again, I'm not on TikTok, so it's mostly, and I'm not on Facebook, so it's primarily Instagram and a little bit of Twitter for me about ADHD. But when I read it, what I take away from it is not, oh, this means I have ADHD or this is so me. It's okay. These things are how this person presents with ADHD, and therefore I can identify with it. Or if they're saying this is ADHD and this is their presentation of it, I go, okay, thinking out loud. Like, I wonder if this person, what else are they experiencing that has led them to think this, or so on. So I try and, I guess, intellectualize it to a certain extent. But again, the prevalence of these memes, so to speak, and these mimetic posts should not be taken as a self-diagnosis or a shortcut for diagnosis. At least for me, when I share these things or when I see these things, it's not I'm speaking on behalf of everybody with ADHD. It's this very specific thing, this one particular comment that this person shares is something that I can personally identify with, and it helps me feel not alone. I feel like there was finally, I don't want to say this label, but just this understanding and this appreciation for it. And I think from the perspective of the people that are sharing these things, that's what we want. We're looking for a place to belong. We're looking for an understanding, whether that comes through the formal diagnosis or whether that comes through something, perhaps just you're having discussions with other people. It's this notion that what I'm undergoing is not solely my situation, that there are others out there with that. And so, it's a long ramble, and I apologize for sort of, monopolizing the last several minutes, but I think that speaks to just the human nature of all of us to want to seek commonality with these certain things. And that if I'm suffering, it may not help alleviate the situation entirely, but it helps soothe a little bit to know that I'm not alone, and that there are other folks out there similarly, struggling or going through these sorts of things. So I'll end it there, and I'll sort of let you all talk about how what I've done was horrible or whatever it was.
Okay.
I'm self-deprecating. You get my point.
No blame there. I'll let everybody else talk. I'm just going to say, in case anybody in the podcast universe is wondering, no, I did not treat Anthony, and no, I did not make the diagnosis.
Nope.
I didn't write a prescription. I didn't do any of it. Okay. So that was not my involvement. He's my brother. He's my best friend. And once again, ethical boundaries. I didn't do anything with that. But I love the fact that you did mention, because I know sometimes I sound so cynical about everything, and I'll repeat myself again, scratch a cynic and you'll realize they're just a wounded idealist. I love the sense of community that can be found via social media based on common themes. I think it can be a very uplifting point, especially when it comes to mental health. I mean, having said that, that's been existing outside of social media as well. I mean, in the US, I'm just thinking of NAMI as a great example of, people that have been advocating for those with mental health concerns at large for decades. So, I'm grateful that it exists, and I'm grateful that reach is just going to get stronger and stronger. I consider that to be a magnificent opportunity for people to embrace things that, are not ideal, and creating the niches of the ability to talk about topics that maybe they wouldn't be able to talk about with other people, or giving the opportunity for people that never have been exposed to a topic to talk about it for the first time. Either way. So I think you made an excellent point with that. I will say that there is a semi-dangerous rabbit hole with that. And I will say this only because I may or may not have anonymously tried to seek these things out just for my own education, where, Anthony, you mentioned a medication. That's fine. I have nothing against the medication itself. I will say that going down some online rabbit holes where people say, oh, that worked for you, where can I get that? Besides going to the doctor, or hey, my mother-in-law takes such and such, and I think it would really help for me. How do I convince my doctor to give it to me? Like there are so many alternative opportunities for mismanagement that I just want to give that caveat. And I think overall, I do think it's a positive thing, like you said. And there are just these underlying concerns that without knowledgeable consideration and collaboration with either professionals or people with just good ethics, it can really lead to some strange places.
And it can lead to damaging places. And we don't have time for me to tell my whole story here, but speaking as a person that this has happened to before, the internet really became much of a thing, when it was disbarred, or not disbarred, that's the wrong word. Sorry, Anthony. It's whatever. Doc, you have to help me. I don't remember what the doctors who lose their medical license and then write books about.
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to name names. I'll be honest, I forgot the term myself. Like, I don't know if there's actually, like, either suspended or revoked. I mean,
right, like people who have left the medical field or had their licenses revoked or whatever, but then write books. And like, as a child getting diagnosed with something and then taking medicine that ultimately, I'm pretty sure that doctors were steered in a direction by that kind of information that resulted in me having damaged kidneys. For something I don't have.
I was going to say, I can almost guarantee you I know what it was, what medication it was. Like, that's a real obvious answer. I'm not going to go into it. Okay, it's your story. It's just, that's horrible. I'm so sorry.
I mean, I appreciate that, but I think that for me is why, like, Anthony, your story and Doc, I appreciate you, is that, like, that is so important that we understand that you don't walk in with this preconceived notion of something you read somewhere or heard TikToks about in today's world, and then convince yourself and argue so much that you come in with a pre-armed, preloaded set of symptoms that you are convinced is that thing. Because like Anthony's story, like, anxiety and ADHD present a shit ton like each other. They really do. Inattentiveness from anxiety presents a lot like each other. And people who have ADHD and depression can look a shit of a lot like bipolar disorder. And it can be really difficult to see the nuances between. And if you convince yourself that that that's what it is and create the argument for it, like, professionals can be swayed by arguments that go like, yeah, that does sound like that. And that can result in inappropriate treatment. And it is important that we walk in as an informed consumer of medical and mental health services, but also not to the point that we're going to railroad the process and color the picture that's being presented to the professional inappropriately, because it is hard for us to see beyond what parents and people and partners tell us that they see in their loved one. And we only see them in a limited capacity. So I think it's really important to recognize that we can do better of coming in informed, but not trying to dictate, no, this is my diagnosis, this is what I have, because it may not be true. And that could result in inappropriate treatment that is ineffective and causes a lot of frustration for years. And I think, Anthony, hearing your story and having one similar to it myself, but different, it resonates with that, and why I get so upset when I see people, like, I'm going to stick with my Jeff Foxworthy term here, but just like that, like, if you have this and this, then you're definitely a narcissistic personality person. Like, that's not true. At least not necessarily.
With the article that I had shared with all of you, there was a separate one, because there was a client that I had earlier in mid to late 2021, where they had presented as someone with DID. And the more and more I digged through a lot of things, the more they had talked about how they came up with their own diagnosis, which was seeing like DID TikTok and DID YouTubers, where it really colored the way they were presenting a lot of their symptoms. And it kind of made me go down the rabbit hole of DID TikTok and DID YouTube. And there is this whole subculture within DID on these platforms that, one, it's good to present information regarding this diagnosis, but two, is very harmful to the individuals that really have this diagnosis, where a lot of the people that are presenting as don't necessarily meet a lot of the criteria. And it creates a lot of confusion, certainly now in COVID, and certainly with a lot of people that are watching these videos, which are early teens, late teens that are searching for an identity. Then it colors things considerably. One of the things that really caught me off guard was learning about fictives and factives, which is something that I had never heard about and something that I had ever been taught. So a fictive is a alter that is a actual fictional character. And then a factive is an alter that is a actual person, like a actual real person, a real celebrity that the person then has an alter of that person, which make me go down a whole rabbit hole there.
It is a whole rabbit hole, and like it frustrates me a lot when I see people like interacting on the internet is like the conversations that different alters have, and that people who do that because they think it might be fun to audition different parts of their personality and write as them and have acting exercises. I think when I see things like that, it's challenging for the way it minimizes a very serious and very challenging diagnosis into something that this might be fun to try. Let's see what this part of me says. What's that? And it's really hard to see that with people and not immediately engage and start challenging it back and like going, okay, but do you really have DID or do you think this is a fun game?
Well, I was just saying off topic, Hannah and I unfortunately have to depart because we have plans, but it was enjoyable during this conversation. One thing I want to say, this is off topic because I know we're going out, but my expertise is in child therapy. And I will say as we get older, there can be this delight sort of in hating on the newest form of social media or the newest thing kids are into. And one thing that I really took from my training and my advisor, who was a few generations older than me, was that you always have to know what is popular and you have to respect it and you have to invest, you have to like be engaged with it. And so part of why I got TikTok is because all of my teenage clients had TikTok and even younger clients. And so I think we can make fun of these newer medias, but I think we have to get involved with them if you're going to work with kids, especially. But I think now TikTok's like everybody. And so it's like, it is good as professionals to get engaged with the things that everybody's engaged with, so that you also know what they're talking about. And also it can help build rapport. I'll tell you, the way that teenagers look at me when they make some sort of joke that they think I don't get, and then they don't know that I am so on TikTok, and they're like, oh, you know that, Brittany? And I'm like, oh, you better believe it. So
I'm hip with it.
That can create a shared dialogue as well. And also, I think going back to the teenage thing, I love teenagers. I've worked so much with teenagers, but this is something adults do as well, which is that I think the over-identifying is a way to over-intellectualize and over-analyze our mental health so we don't have to feel our mental health and actually be vulnerable with our mental health. And so whenever I have a client who has become a little therapist of their own, part of that is a defense mechanism to not really get down and dirty and open and vulnerable with what's going on for you. And by overanalyzing your symptoms, over pathologizing, it's actually a way to be guarded. And it's a slick way to be guarded because you sound like you're really in it and you're really into mental health and you know what's going on and you're all over it. But really, that in and of itself is a way to protect yourself and to defend against being more vulnerable. So something I'm coming across more with this more access to information is having to cut through that sometimes with clients of like, I get it. You know all the right terms, you know all the terminology, you got the facts and the figures, but are you actually like sitting in your sadness and just being there? Are you able to really like be introspective about your thoughts? Are you noticing them or are you naming them? And so I think that's also, but like I said, adults I work with who do that too. We love to be in our quote unquote logical, rational mind and vilify our emotional mind. And so I think this excess information does that as well. And also TikTok is just the newest version of this, Dr. Phil, Facebook. Like, I think this is just TikTok is the younger generation's version of Dr. Phil and Facebook and Marjorie down the street, who's like, you know what that is? I heard about that. It's like, Phil got the adjutant. You should get that checked. Da, 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 da. And so I want us to be cautious about how much we vilify newer media because it's for young people. And that doesn't mean that there isn't worthwhileness or that we can't find the boomer version, which is when I go on Facebook and someone's trying to sell me essential oils to cure depression, like without seeing anybody else, like that in itself will cure depression. Or if you get like, buy my candles, like there's versions of this snake oil shit everywhere. And that's a little bit more nefarious because they're trying to actually get my dollar bills out of my hands. And TikTok is just trying to take up my time and my energy. Sometimes dollars as well, but mostly my time and my energy. And maybe my common sense sometimes. But, so anyway, thanks for having me. I got to bounce off. But it's been a pleasure talking to you all.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Hannah, as well. Lovely seeing you, ladies. I guess we don't really have too much more, I would think, to add. We've already been going on for, close to an hour and a half at this point. And now that it's a sausage fest, I don't really know what else, what else we could add.
I'll just add, why Brittany gotta, put me on blast like that? Like, damn, I didn't realize I was that bad. Oh my God. Oh, am I projecting that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
But what you were saying, it harkens to a point where we shouldn't vilify new media because there's always something that's going to be coming forward. And as mental health professionals, we kind of have to keep up with kind of these changes. But I think we also need to be on that forefront. And I think that's one thing that a lot of mental health professionals have a hard time with is being on that forefront because we're so used to being in the background.
And we've all done that. We all did that with podcasts. Let's be honest. We all did exactly that thing. And like, I don't have problems with TikTok. And I think Brittany's point is important that we preach the same caution with that we preach with anything else. Just recognize that it's brain crack and that it is designed to hook you in and keep your attention and be just enough that it grabs you and sticks with you and then sends you onto something else that does the same thing over and over and over, which is psychologically addictive. And recognizing that preaching the same and with an algorithmic nature to it, that it goes, you watched that whole thing? Good. We'll show you more like that. You must have liked it. So it learns you and then it learns what you like. And that creates bias. And we need to be able to watch for that because doing research where I'm going to read this book and then I'm going to read this book and then I'm going to read this book or I'm going to read this journal that has countering opinions just listed in it is something that is missing from modern social media and modern rational thought. Is most people have not had to take a research methods class where you learn to look at who is saying it, who is saying against it, what methods did they use, what math are they using to prove it, how many subjects did they test this on?
Yep.
Right. What bias did they declare that they have? Who's paid for the study? Yep. All those kinds of things are things that do not happen with social media or news media or news entertainment, as the FCC has classified things, that people do not apply logic. And those things are not regulated by the same academic rigor that actual news or academic journals or things like that or professionals are regulated by, that you have to have facts to back up what you're saying. And TikTok and social media don't have that.
Because there are a lot of TikTok creators that I really do enjoy and love and have actually mentioned to clients because they're licensed mental health professionals. They put out great content, which I feel that clients could really benefit from. But these are people that I have watched a lot of their videos, kind of researched who they are, kind of they back up what they claim. And they are experts in that field.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a little frustrating because I'll use the older examples. So, mind you, I'm probably the least qualified person to talk about any of this because I'm just not a social media person at this point. But on Twitter, I do have, journals that I follow. I have certain sources that I follow. And yet when I look at their feeds, I'm like, oh, no wonder nobody looks at these. I don't expect them to be the bastions of entertainment, but even just the idea of engagement. What I think has happened from an academic rigor standpoint is that, to follow the stereotype, people are locked in the ivory tower. The idea that this information is not accessible and not pushed forward in a way that is going to allow for the rest of us who are willing to be a much better storefront for all of this, it does create a situation of the haves and have-nots. And when I say haves, I'm talking about the people that have the professionalism, have the knowledge, have the ability to cultivate the things that we see and do the proper due diligence and present it to people in a way that's going to be helpful. Until that gap gets a bit better, I'm not sure we're going to make nearly as much headway as we could. And I'm not putting that on anybody else. I'm saying that about ourselves. I'm talking about my American Psychiatric Association. I'm talking about organizations that will, put like these headers of how important mental health is. And yet when we have local meetups for things or they're advertised and I'm advertised as a speaker or something locally and I try and ask them to promote it, it's like, yeah, but we don't have anybody available. Like, are you kidding me? That's literally the example that we need for people to explain that we are just as viable as any of the people that are social media influencers, and we can do just as much good if we get the chance. And yet
it's kind of lacking in the time.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, it's kind of locked in that ivory tower and extremely bland.
And the information is also criticized by people who in the ivory tower sit in the darkest, deepest room in the basement on hot chairs with iron spikes, drinking coffee all day with no bathrooms anywhere near them. So like it's so bland and critical and that it's not even accessible. And then they want to charge you $150 a month to read it.
It's really a shame. And actually, I'll just give a brief example of this. So I'm a member of the Black Caucus for the American Psychiatric Association, and someone mentioned having a panel on Black Panther. Now, anybody that knows me at this point, I'm all about it. I'm like, this is great. Meanwhile, I don't want to promote ageism here, but one of the older members just said, like, quote him, he's like, I'm sick of this shit. You guys need to grow up. Like, it's that's painful. That was legitimately painful, because I felt like, and this person was in a position of power, and I felt like you just took one of the best opportunities we have to connect with a massive audience, which we, of course, on this video chat know, and you just flushed it down the toilet.
The entirety of the geek therapy movement.
That's what we do. That's what Popcorn Psych does. That's what your show does. That's what we all do. We're the mental health Avengers, for God's sakes. Like, there's so much of it. That's Dr. Scarlet and superhero therapy. As you said, the whole geek therapy.
Yeah, geek therapy, geek therapeutics. There are clinicians that, and I'm doing the training now to become certified in it, where you are learning these ways to intervene and bring characters for people to relate with that speaks to them. And again, being a white cisgendered male, I can't speak to how someone in the Black community can really gravitate towards a character like Black Panther and how important that character in that movie was for an entire generation of people.
Yeah. And my point even wasn't even necessarily to be that granular with it, but just to let the audience that's listening to this know that it is fair to say that not everybody is going to understand how we're trying to get the message across and how we're trying to, eliminate the stigma. We're doing the best we can. And I know that the other professionals that I work with that may not understand in totality what our podcasts are about and everything else. They want to help too, but they don't know how. And what I'm talking about now is not just the chasm of new technology. I'm talking about just the chasm of engagement. And that is something that I think the current mediums are doing better than ever before. The level of engagement that you can have with anybody about any topic is now exploded. You're not getting the toothpaste back in the tube. So if someone wants to go down whatever rabbit hole they want to on their phone or on their tablet or on their computer, whatever, they can do it. And like it or not, they're going to come armed when they see you. And I love to have it as a cordial civil engagement back and forth, and having relational topics that are going to allow us to expand upon the things that are relevant to that person, rather than have what I think we need to guard against, the stuffy idea that the way that I was doing this is now the way it's going to continue to be for the rest of my career. That is the danger that I see as technology progresses, where each generation just gets so stuck in their ways that now we're going to have to ration out who sees who, because, the older docs aren't going to want to see the teenagers, not because they're not child or adolescent therapists, but because they simply can't understand the language anymore. That's the fear that I have with this. It's not whether or not it's going to do damage in the long run. It's here, whatever it is, whatever the effect is, it's going to be here. But I'm wondering if there is a way that we can make sure the zeitgeist always continues to update for the people that still want to put in the effort. I know that the people on this call, I know we're going to do that. That's how we are. I see that. I hear it. But I do worry for some of my colleagues that aren't quite there. I really wanted to put that out there because I wanted to know other people's thoughts about it.
I think there's a Hebrew proverb that I've learned that I share with clients all the time. I am not Jewish, so learning Hebrew proverbs is not something I've had the opportunity to do often, except when I go into Wikipedia holes like Anthony. But the proverb that I saw that really resonated with me is, don't confine your children to your own learning. They are of a different time. And remembering that we as therapists are going to encounter clients of a different time. And we have to, like Brittany aptly said, we have to stay in touch with the ways that they are staying in touch and interacting with information in the world, and helping to provide guidance to it of going, here's how you suss out for yourself what is good information and what's bullshit. But recognize that, even with us, and why we each all have our own shows, and our shows have our different flavor, and our movements have slightly different flavor from each other. But why we bond together is because sometimes someone can hear the same message from 10 different voices, but the one they needed to hear it from was yours.
And being okay with having clients teach you things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nobody knows it all.
Nobody. And nobody can get through to everybody. And that's okay. And it's okay for clients to seek out information. It's just important that, as we all keep a mind on understanding that it is important to consider what source is speaking, and to take what they say with a grain of salt. That even people who aren't trained mental health professionals can provide valuable information on a mental health experience, but recognizing that it is one experience and not something that is representative is an important distinction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we could obviously go on and on about this for another hour and a half, but I think this is as good a place as any to wrap it up, especially since Brittany and Hannah left us 15, 20 minutes ago. We're still here. So I will just, I guess we'll start off with, first, thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Hannah and Brittany. They had to duck out, but thank you. So Ben, as the sole representative left of the show, where can folks find you on the internets?
So you can find us anywhere podcasts are listed at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Facebook at Popcorn Psychology, on TikTok at Popcorn Psychology, and you can also find us on Twitter at popcorn_psych.
And then over to Doc, Guardians, etc. Go ahead and tell us where folks can find all of your stuff.
So everyone can find us all at Guardians MH, so guardiansmh.org. We're at Guardians MH on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. We're starting to try to post a few more things there. Me personally, people can find me on Twitter at SSJ5Goku28.
And we are Capes on the Couch. We are not on TikTok, although we're coming up on a hiatus since I'm going to be having a child very shortly. Not me, my wife, but we're going to be having a child very shortly. So we're going to take a short hiatus. And I'm debating whether or not in that interim to jump on TikTok. I think it's high time because that's where the kids are. That's where the ears and eyes are. And if we want to get out there and get our message out there and in front of many folks as possible, then by gum, that's where we need to be. But in any case, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. And our website is capesonthecouch.com. And you can find us on all major pod catchers except for Spotify. So this is going to do it for Mental Health Avengers number 4. Thank you very much. Also, go and follow and give it a follow and like to our fellow Mental Health Avengers who unfortunately couldn't make it here, Freudian Sips and Pop Psych 101. You can check them out as well. Hopefully we can get them on the next episode. But I think that's going to do it for us tonight. And hopefully it won't be another year and a half before we all get together and do this again. So again, thank you to Dr. Goku, Ben, Hannah, Brittany, and Doc Issues. I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening, and we will see you soon.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.